Okay, so tell can you tell like listeners, readers, what your childhood was like?
My childhood. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, and I started gymnastics like at a really young age. I started flipping around when I was 2 years old, and then my mom opened a gym, and so I did gymnastics, from a little young level. I think she opened the gym when I was 6. I did gymnastics through grade school, high school, and got a college scholarship for gymnastics. So I moved to California and did gymnastics at Cal State Fullerton. And so most of my upbringing though was in Phoenix. And I mean, I was pretty much a normal kid, except I lived a lot of my life in the gym, which is what gymnasts do, when you're competing at the higher levels.
Did you always like is that what you wanted to do, or did your parents encourage you to do it at first, or
I was kind of born into the gym, is what we say, because my mom started the gym, like I said, when I was 6. And so I was a natural when it came to gymnastics. And I was good. So, as I did it, I mean, I obviously fell in love with the sport. And as a little kid, just like every other little kid, like who watched back in my day, was watching Nadia Comaneci, seeing these Olympic gymnasts, of course you want to go to the Olympics, but that's a great dream. And I think every kid should go after that dream. It's not as easy to attain, I guess you would say. But when I was a little kid, I also decided I wanted to get a scholarship for gymnastics. So that's pretty much what I just set out to do.
did you have like a lot of siblings, or
I had an older brother
okay.
who, wasn't as much into smart sports. He was very smart. And, he did some sports, but not like I did, where that was my daily routine.
And is there a fond memory you have of your childhood, like at an event that happened, or even something at the gym, or was there what's like a um
Yeah. I mean, I remember, one of the gymnastics meets, it was this like the state championship, and I had gotten first place like on every event
oh,
and all around, which is big. But that's like a memory that's never going to leave you, when you win every event. And I'm not sure exactly my age at that time, but that was a big highlight. Definitely when I got my scholarship for gymnastics, that was a big highlight. And my teammates and I, I mean, we grew up together in the gym, and they're some of my closest friends now,
oh
the
wow.
ones that I grew up with in the gym and went on road trips with and all that.
What kind of road trips did you guys go on?
Well, this was a long time ago. So we would go to Utah and do, gymnastics trips there, or go to California. Again, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. And if you made it to regionals or nationals, then you might travel to, a different state also. And, we did different trips, but like that became your family, because you spent more time in the gym with your teammates than you really did with your family at home. I
Hmm.
mean, that's typical for a gymnast life. You would be with your family on the weekends, but after school until you went to bed, basically you were at the gym, came home, and you'd go to bed. So you spent so much time with those people. And I mean, I wouldn't want my childhood to be any other way. It was amazing to have those kind of friendships again, like I said, that I have today.
Do you think was what do you think there's something that gymnastics taught you as that you like still have now, like even quality
Oh,
traits?
definitely. I mean, gymnastics teaches you to persevere. There's no doubt. To set goals, to keep going, even, when it's painful or when it's hard and you want to give up or you don't want to do it. And also the mental game, I think. Definitely once you're competing, and just the mental game of wanting to do a certain trick that maybe you're afraid to do,
Hmm.
and just the mental part that comes with that, but overcoming that. So I mean, I think it's really good, and it definitely strengthens your mind. And has been said that it was beneficial to me, when I had my car accident, that I was a gymnast who knew how to push through things and how, to keep on going and persevere. And, it's just what you do. You're a gymnast,
Right.
you keep working hard, and you work through pain, and you just get up.
Was there ever a time, like, even when you were a kid, that you didn't want to keep doing it? Like, did you want to give up on gymnastics or?
I did. When I was about 16, I wanted to quit gymnastics. And my mom, and I grew up in the same gym, the gym that my mom had started, but she sold it when I was young.
Okay.
Um, and so she said, okay, instead of quitting, like right now, why don't you transfer to a different gym in the Valley? And this gym was in Tempe, so it was much farther. But she's like, why don't you transfer and give it a try? And if you don't, want to continue, then you can make that decision. And I'm like forever grateful that she did that.
Hmm.
Instead of kind of beating it into, like you have to keep going. I mean, she gave me the choice, but she gave me a different option.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, try that, give it a whirl. And I knew the gymnasts at the other gym, and I knew the coaches really well. And because I had competed against them for, so many years of my life. And so I'm really grateful that, she encouraged me in that way instead of just quitting, but to try something else. And, it worked out great. And I continued with gymnastics, and, it paid for my college.
So was the old gym were you wanting to quit because you just didn't like the environment after a while, or?
I think it was probably a combination of a lot of things. And sometimes in gyms, even, things can just change sometimes.
Yeah.
Maybe how the coaching is, or just the direction of, where the gym is going. I think I just needed something new,
Mm.
you know. And so, and one of my other teammates had already gone to the different gym.
Okay.
Um, and like she was the teammate that we both pushed each other a lot.
Mm.
We compete each other and made each other a better gymnast. So she had already gone, and like my mom's like, KP did it, why don't you try it? And that's what I did. And it turned out to be great. It's kind of a good lesson in life. Just maybe do something a little different, or try it a different way,
Yeah.
and it
Did
might work
you
out great.
did you have a conversation with your mom or your dad that you really remember, um, that kind of encouraged you even when you were an adult?
As far as like dealing with something else,
Like, it could be anything, like, if there was, kind of a motto your parents lived by, they still instilled in you, or a.
we always just worked hard and kept going, and you really didn't quit,
Mm.
you know, which is a good goal to have as a gymnast, even when you're trying new tricks and you don't get them because you fail quite a bit, you don't quit. You keep going, and you keep practicing, and you keep trying, and day after day after day. I think just always just striving to continue, and just trying to be your best. And I mean, I grew up in a really positive house, and I had very supportive parents, which I'm so grateful for now, because I see so many households are not that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot to be grateful for.
So, for life in general, and it could be in the season you're in now, or just, I mean, it could be your whole life, depending on how you look at it, but what do you think is something that makes life beautiful for you? Like, what's something that you love about life?
I love that, you can be going through like extremely hard times, or depressing times, or difficult times, but it's going to get better. Like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I've seen that in different aspects of my life, with my car accident, and even in gymnastics when I like was done. But I kept on, persevering, and I was determined, and, things always get better. And if you look back at it when you're in your really difficult times, when you want to quit or you want to give up, and had you done that, like how different your life would have gone,
Yeah.
you know? But then there's sometimes where that is the answer. And sometimes that's hard to swallow, when maybe you have to stop doing something or you have to end something. That can be hard, but you can know that keep going and there's brighter days ahead. I mean, it really is true.
What is the meaning of life to you? Like, why do you live?
I have a really strong relationship with the Lord. And I mean, I'm a real strong Christian, and that's why I live, to shine the light of Jesus to other people,
Mm.
and to share him with other people. And I'm thankful, for the car accident that I did have, because it gave me such a platform and opportunity to be able to share about him and share about, just my story, which has changed, over the years, but you can always find good things even in the midst of the dark times, and just like we said before, like just persevere, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and life is a gift. You're not guaranteed that you're going to wake up tomorrow or that you're going to even make it home from work, so be so thankful for like all the moments we have, and don't take things for granted. If you need to reach out to someone or call your parents or talk to that friend who's been on your mind, like I would encourage someone to do that.
What for you has been the hardest struggle you've gone through? Because you have been through several different things that are hard.
Right.
What do you consider the one that was really just hard on your soul, and how you worked that with the Lord?
I would say, I mean, definitely my car accident was difficult. There's no doubt. And then, waking up, being in a coma, and realizing you lost all the memory of meeting, dating your husband is pretty traumatic. But even with that, I mean, I just kind of went with it and figured I loved him before. I'll get to know him again. And like, I had a real kind of happy-go-lucky attitude, and it wasn't going to do me any good to dwell on what I had lost. The 2 years of memory that I lost, it wasn't going to do me any good. So I really looked ahead, the light at the end of the tunnel. And, we built a great life and a great family over 25 years. So to answer your question, the most difficult thing on my soul was definitely when my marriage ended.
Mm.
That was very traumatic after, preaching and representing a vow, which we did and which we kept. But, there's sometimes like, there's nothing you can do about the other person's actions, thoughts and actions.
Yeah.
And if they choose to step out, like there's nothing you can do. So that was the hardest part for me, because I felt definitely like I had failed.
Failed
I
what?
had failed my goal and failed like what was given to me. And after 25 years of keeping a commitment and staying, steadfast in that was really hard.
How did you wrestle with that with the Lord when that happened?
I wanted to I wanted to reconcile. I wanted the marriage to succeed. I did not want a divorce. And I learned pretty valuable lessons that sometimes there's nothing you can do if the other person, I'm not responsible for the other person's choices.
Yeah.
And I can't make someone stay in it. And it, after time, you realize that it was probably for the best. And for me, it was for the best, probably even that we're not together today. Because, we didn't have a perfect marriage, nor did we ever claim we had a perfect marriage, because there's good times and bad, sickness and health, that was hard. I struggled a lot with the Lord on that. And, on the days like you don't even want to get out of bed. Like, yes, I've felt those days, and I didn't want to face just other people or the world. And maybe mine was different because it was so in the public eye at the
Yeah.
time, and I was in a small town where everyone knew what was going on, even compared to if I was in a big city. It might have been a little easier, but it is what it is. And it was tough, but you can work through it. There's no doubt. And I just rely on the Lord's strength, and he has a different plan for me. And so I'm just walking to even see what the next 25 years are going to bring.
How was it for you with divorce in the Christian community? Because I know that many people have shared that, like I have personal friends who have divorced. Lots of times it's not something they wanted, but it happened. And they experienced a lot of rejection that they would claim from the church, or they just really struggled in their faith with divorce because they couldn't find people who'd want to come around and support them. How was that experience for you?
I understand that completely. I mean, my divorce did have adultery. So in the church's eyes, maybe I would have been looked at like that was fine to get divorced because of adultery in the relationship. Although I view it completely different now in a sense. And I don't think like a godly marriage, a marriage that the Lord designed for people that are in abusive relationships, like you need to get out and get some help.
Right.
I view it differently, and maybe those people won't be supported, but I don't believe the Lord's calling, people to stay in emotionally and physically abusive relationships. I definitely have a different view on it now. I struggled a lot with emotional abuse in my relationship, and I wouldn't have thought maybe that's a reason that I could seek out help or maybe even leave. That's a very tough question, and I think you have to know where you are personally with your walk with the Lord and where you are with the Lord. Because that's who I answer to, is to my God. I don't answer to the people that are going to type rude comments on my Instagram or on my Facebook page. And even in my situation, like, yeah, that's been out there too. I chose not to read it because that wasn't going to get me anywhere. And those, comments, those people answer to the Lord for everything they've written about somebody, and that's what I look at. I mean, I stand before God someday and I answer for myself, but it is hard. Unfortunately, divorce is a difficult one in the Christian world and the Christian church. Unfortunately, it's not super supported.
Do you think you've forgiven your husband, or is that something that you see as like a daily thing that you've had to do, or?
Oh, I've completely forgiven him. I mean, I have. And, again, I'm not responsible for his words, thoughts, actions, any of that, and just responsible for me. It took some time. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. You just persevere and you go day after day, and but eventually, you're to a point where you forgive them because it's really holding you in bondage more than them.
Yeah.
Because there's times the other person just moves on. So it's best for you to be able to get to that point where you can forgive, to move on, not always the easiest. And I think it just happens at a different rate for each person.
If you were to write like a book just on your life, like if you're thinking individually about yourself, what do you think you would title it?
Ooh, that's a good one. Right now I would title it New Beginnings. because I have new beginnings, and I've like found who I am as a person, more so now that I'm out of my marriage relationship, and and that all kind of ties in with my head injury and all that. That's, um, that I was a certain way in my marriage. But I think once I was out of my marriage, I was forced in a sense to like think on my own and make choices for myself and kind of be a big girl, and I've done a lot and I've grown a lot. And it's really interesting because of my head injury, my personality was changed about 30 to 40% right after my head injury. And I got a little bit better even in my marriage, but now I feel like the Krickitt I was prior to my car accident, which was almost 30 years ago. It's like I've gone back to like the core of like who I used to be, what I used to be like.
What was the difference after your car accident before?
Well, early on, obviously like my confidence level was completely changed. Just the way that I acted and responded, which is very normal with head injuries. Maybe you would have outbursts or you would say things you never would have said. And I've kind of just like grown over the years, but like inside, I feel like I'm Krickitt again, which not everyone's going to be able to understand that because not everyone's inside understanding, but I just feel like I'm who I used to be, kind of like in my soul and just in my brain, even though my brain is still different from my traumatic brain injury. I just feel more like me, and probably maybe parts of my personality. And I've talked to some of my girlfriends that knew me before the car accident and were like in my wedding and everything. And they noticed it too, that because they said it's like Krickitt, like you're back. Interesting, but the brain is fascinating.
Wow. And you'd say that you feel more like this, but that was so even like a 30-year-long process to kind of.
Right. And some of it, definitely was because of my head injury. I mean, the majority of my changes were because of my head injury, and personalities change over time anyways, as we know. But for me, it's just like something inside, internal, that I feel like the old me again. And that all started to occur once I was, divorced, and I had to like make new decisions for myself.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting. And it's deep and there's a lot to it, but it's just kind of fascinating.
Yeah, no, 100%. Is there something you still want to do that you haven't done yet?
I mean, I would like to like continue to encourage people and inspire people with my story. I mean, even though the vow ended abruptly, it's not as though my story is dead. And there's parts of my story that I've never even talked about. I never talked about the mental struggle that I had with depression, and I struggled with suicide for decades. Like I never talked about that when the vow was talked about for 25 years, because I wasn't really strong enough to talk about it then, but like I'm able to now. And I'm thankful that, I've gotten help, and I'm on medication, which was a very humbling thing for a Christian woman to finally like I had to get on meds. I had to, because I had to control my suicidal thoughts. So it was humbling for me to bow down to that, and of course I had the normal Christian struggle. Am I not trusting enough? Do I not have enough faith? And it's basically like, if you had high blood pressure, you would go on a high blood pressure med and wouldn't think anything about it. Well, if someone is struggling with mental illness and suicide and all that, and you need to go on a medication to help control that, then I would encourage you to do that, So I'm thankful that I finally did like seek out the help that I needed, and I don't struggle in that area anymore, but I completely understand it. And unfortunately I've had like students that have, they didn't win their battle with suicide.
Hmm. And students you personally knew, or?
And and I was in a small town, but I think because I have gone through such traumatic events with my head injury, like I was often the one that was called in and would go into the ICU and like hold my student's hand and pray for them, you
Mhm.
know, and the majority that did those attempts didn't make it. But so it's really personal for me, people that struggle with suicide, because I've been around so many. I've lost friends. I've lost good friends to suicide. And then, I've struggled with it myself.
Did
So
you struggle with
I
it?
would like to be able to help like in that capacity to
Yeah.
encourage.
Did you struggle with it because the head injury, so it was more of a almost something you couldn't really control, in the sense that it was something that was different about your brain, or was it depression from the circumstances as well that made it really hard?
Right. Well, when I look back at it now, yes, I mean, I struggled with suicidal thoughts it's very common with people that have had head injuries, concussions, and you hear of the athletes that take their lives and it's because of the trauma to the brain. That is, I believe, why I struggled with the suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
But when I think back, I was thinking this the other day, as far as depression goes, that definitely came about after the car accident. But then I think about it, and I definitely can see where there was times growing up, even though I was a gymnast and I had confidence and I was good at what I did, there was definite times during my childhood that I struggled with depression, but we just didn't like categorize it as that. You didn't talk about
Yeah.
it. So it's great now that kids can talk about it and get some help or get counseling or some medication, or you know seek a pastor at their church. So the suicidal thoughts came after the car accident, but when I think about depression, I think I struggled with that prior to my head injury.
Hmm. What was there a scripture verse that you found really encouraging when you would read it, or just something you would, because when you have depression or even anxiety, you don't always feel things, so it doesn't really matter. You don't really feel different, but was
Right.
something that you held on to as like, well, no matter how I feel, this is true, and so I can at least just think on this.
Right. Well, I know like when I would think back to maybe verses that I had memorized prior, God causes all things to work together for the good for those who love him and those that are called according to his name, or his good purpose. Like I remember that verse kind of came back to me, even though I lost memory of meeting, dating my husband, I could remember some verses I had memorized prior, in my college years. And it was right after we realized that I lost all the memory of meeting him and all that. That of course I read Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which I was an athlete. I never knew that verse as an athlete. That would have been pretty cool. But after my car accident, I remember reading that and the verse just bounced off the pages to me, basically like, I mean, he says I can do all things. And I just was like, okay, I can do this. I didn't know who my husband was and I was living with him, so it was kind of a bizarre situation. But with a head injury, like, I mean, I was raised, like they had to teach me how to walk and like talk, how to brush my teeth, how to fix my hair, like how to do life again. I was reverted back all the way to a child. So when I realized that I can do all things, I probably was acting about like a 10 or maybe a 12-year-old at that point of my recovery. But that verse, I mean, God's word doesn't lie. So that's the verse I held on to.
A good verse.
Yeah. And I figured, okay, I can do this. I mean, it was very confusing to me in my brain, but I had the Lord's strength to help me.
What is there, this is kind of, I guess, more of a funny question, but do you think there's an animal that you, if you were to like put your personality to, that you think you're like?
Ooh, I can't say that I've ever been asked that. Um, I mean, I like cats. I like dogs too, don't get me wrong. But I mean, I do like little kittens. Um, but I don't know. I've never really thought of an animal, you know. But I guess cats have 9 lives, you know. And they keep on going and they climb and they can figure it out. And in a sense, I feel like that. I just like how to figure out this life that I didn't remember and how it was. Because I had only been married for 10 weeks prior to the car accident. And
Yeah.
I never lived in that town. So, I mean, everything was brand new. But the weird part about our story, which is kind of hard, it doesn't always come out this way, but I lived with my husband for a year before we knew I didn't have memory of him. Like everyone, like my parents showed me these wedding pictures. My parents said I was married to this guy. I watched a video. I'm the girl in the picture. But what no one realized is that I didn't know that I didn't remember him until we went to a counselor after being together for a year. And the counselor looked at me and he goes, Krickitt, he goes, I don't think you have any memory of meeting, dating, or marrying Kim. And it's like the lights went off on my head because finally someone connected the dots for me. And that was what the whole problem was, is that I had no memory. I was kind of just like acting it and playing it, but I wasn't able to say, because of the severity of my head injury, I don't know who you are. So I tried to play the role for like a year until a counselor was the one who nailed it and made us realize the memory was all gone. But that's life with the traumatic brain injury. Like you don't understand what's going on. And someone may act like they know and they understand, but they really don't, So recovery from a TBI is long, and there's lots of ups and downs.
Is there something in nature that you find really inspiring, either with your walk with the Lord or just in general?
I mean, of course, like I love to be at the beach, I mean, and I can even remember in college, because I was in Southern California, like going to Newport Beach and just like having great quiet times on the beach with my girlfriends who were in my wedding. And I like going to the mountains also. I lived in the mountains for like 25 years. So those are kind of great places of like solitude. And I just love a sunrise and sunset.
Is there someone you look up to currently? Or it could be someone who's passed away, like a historical figure, or someone in your life who's passed away, or someone who's still alive that you want to be like?
I mean, my brother is very encouraging to me spiritually. And so I've always he's my go-to person to ask things or to get like sound spiritual advice off of. I have some great girlfriends that during college, I think we all sharpened each other, and we're still great friends. So, but there's not like anyone in the public eye or anything like that. Like my brother was, yes, my spiritual person that kind of showed me how to walk with the Lord, I would say, or I was able to watch him in a sense, kind of from a distance, because we were both already out of the house, but just from a distance, just seeing, his faith.
How did you come to know the Lord? Was it through your parents or was it for your brother later in life?
It's interesting. When I was a kid, I can remember I always wanted like a diary, like my dear God diary. And I just always had this love for spiritual things. And for God and that I wanted to be good and, all that. But it was when I was 14 that I ran across a little booklet that was put out by Campus Crusade for Christ. And it taught, it walked you through the steps, of salvation and asking for forgiveness and asking the Lord into your heart. And I did that when I was 14, but I didn't tell anyone that I had received Christ because I didn't know that that's what it was when I had asked Jesus into my life. And it was in college, after I was just like, I needed to find a church. And so, because we would go to church on and off, off and on as a kid. But in college, about my junior year, I was like, I need to find a church. And I remember I went to this college group at this church and the message of salvation was preached. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I did when I was 14. I asked Jesus into my life, and I'm called a Christian. Like I didn't really realize what I had done. And so that's when like I really started walking with the Lord was when I was in college and I realized that's what I was. I was a Christian. The Lord lived inside of me. And that's when my life definitely changed.
Do you have a favorite book?
I mean, of course, the Word of God, everyone, loves the Word of God. I'm reading different books right now. Just some different stories, but I don't really have a favorite, I guess you would say. I've probably read some encouraging Christian stories, personal stories a long time ago that were great, but I just kind of right now I'm reading books that my daughter had. And just for fun, but I mean, I spend time with the Lord every day and that's what I do. But I usually just try to get into the Word.
Meaning?
Like get into just reading the Bible and not reading like other books that go with it. I mean, Chuck Swindoll was my pastor in Southern California. So I do have a Chuck Swindoll book that I'm kind of going through now. It's like a devotional book. So I'm doing that. And I look up to him because he was the pastor that was at the church that I went to when I discovered, oh, that's what I am. I'm a Christian. So I like love his teaching. I just think it's really solid and sound.
And then one last question for you. Is there like a song or a piece of music that either you really identify with as like this really like sounds like me or my story, or just a song in general that has a very special place and why?
I mean, I love like all worship music, like elevation worship and, way back in the day, it was vineyard worship music. And even though like I've lost my memory and all that, like I can still remember all the vineyard worship songs, and a lot of them are worship songs you sing in church today, maybe sung by somebody else. But, those are really, I think, the most special to me. And I can also just kind of go back to the time in my college life when I was walking really strong with the Lord and just was completely full of joy. And that's what gives me hope, like in my walk now, because you can have joy in the midst of trials. I know that seems like, so weird, but it is true. And I've even experienced that, in the past 5 years going through my divorce and being, an empty nester, a single parent, then an empty nester, because my kids are both out of the house now. Having joy is great. And I mean, so pretty much old time worship songs I love.
Is there one in particular, like a name?
Trying to think right off the bat. I can't think of a name right now. Sorry.
You're good.
Names of a lot of them.
It's interesting because it seems like a lot of the old songs though we don't sing as much anymore. Like church used to sing Heart of Worship a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard that song in years though, like at any church. It's
Right.
more modern music.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of elevation worship music, which I love. I mean, our church does. And then our church also writes their own. So that's kind of fun. But I'm trying to think one in particular. I don't know.
Do you
I can't remember. I have a head injury. I'll pull the head injury card.
do you like any of like Matt Papa? Do you know Matt Papa's music?
Mm-mm. I
Matt
don't think.
Boswell. They write like modern, well, not even modern sounding hymns, but they write hymn sounding music in our day. Um, and that's something when I've been listening to, especially there's one called it's like Lord from Sorrow's Deep I Call. And I found that really encouraging during
Oh, that's
hard
great.
times. Yeah.
Right. That's awesome. I mean, definitely I did lots of trips from Arizona to New Mexico when I was gonna move back from New Mexico to Arizona. There was definitely some worship songs and probably even some country songs then that like, got you to have a really good cry. Which is interesting because that was something that I was really affected by with my head injury were my emotions. So I wasn't able to really feel stuff deep in my heart, and it was very difficult for me to cry. Like I just wasn't able to cry. Um and I mean, in a sense, maybe that helped me with some of the difficulties in my marriage. But once my marriage fell apart, that aspect of who I am returned. Like I now can feel like pain in my heart
Hmm.
and I can cry, like especially, during worship songs, and I can just cry over, events that are sad. And I didn't have the ability to do that for 25 years.
Really not crying at all?
Very few times. You could count on one hand, easy.
Oh
No,
wow.
I just even standing, like I said, I was, standing by the bedside of my students that have, tried to take their lives, holding their hand, praying over them. And I couldn't even shed a tear. And that's very normal that like your emotions can get affected. It depends on what part of your brain is damaged, will affects you. But once my life fell apart, it's like it tapped into into that part of my brain again. And now that part of my brain works.
Wow. Could you at least feel sad inside even if you couldn't like show it?
Um,
No.
I mean, it wasn't like sad and pain in my heart. It was maybe I could acknowledge sadness in my brain. Like I was sad, but I really couldn't feel deep pain in my heart
Hmm.
or be able to cry.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there's a traumatic brain injury can affect you in tons of different ways,
Do
you
you
know.
really love that you can cry now? I guess that sounds weird to
I
say.
do. I know that sounds terrible. No, it's like because of the pain I went through because of my divorce and all that. Like I'm thankful that it has restored that aspect of me like back to being kind of normal,
Yeah.
what we'd consider normal. I mean, head injured people would understand the opposite, but I'm glad I can cry again. Yes. And I'm glad I can feel emotion. And the pain once my marriage fell apart was overwhelming because I hadn't felt like pain in my heart in decades.
Hmm.
So it was very severe pain.
Hmm.